Now, our speaker today is Dialogue Officer for the British Humanist Association and President of the National Federation of Atheists, Humanists and Secular Student Societies. He recently won the Charity Staff and Volunteers Award for Charity Innovator of the Year because of his work with faith and community groups and for promoting the representation of humanism on local forums and networks. He was raised as a Catholic in Northern Ireland. When he first started to doubt his religion, he thought he was ill. So at the age of 19, he went on a Catholic retreat and tried really hard to believe in God. But it didn't work. Rory says that he didn't feel liberated by this experience. For him, it was a matter of grim acceptance. But then he heard about humanism and thought that sounded perfect. So will you please give a rousing welcome to Rory Fenton.
Hi, good afternoon. As David said, I am from Northern Ireland, so if I speak quickly or strangely, please tell me, because I tend to do both.
Rory, that will turn the slides on if you want to.
Okay.
And if you want to stand here, it might be easier. Well, anyway, if you can try actually.
Thank you. Just I'm going to talk about rules of engagement, humanists and interfaith, accord or discord. And the reason that I'm talking about this is because that's what I do. That's what I'm really interested in at the British Humanists Association as their dialogue officer. It's not a full-time thing. I'm volunteer there, I'm a student otherwise, but I'm really very passionate about it. So thank you for inviting me to share some of this with you. Let's see if this works. Great. So this is what I'm going to go through today. It won't be very long, I promise. It's also, I can't help but get a lot of people very interested and engaged, so there should be hopefully a good bit of time at the end for some questions and answers. So who am I? You heard my life story there. I hadn't actually submitted that, so that was found by Google. But I didn't. What is dialogue? Why we want to do it, or why I think we should be doing it. What we've been up to at the BHA, and then lastly what you can do here with Dorset Humanists. So, who am I? What am I doing? That's me with a little baby chicken. Oh no. So, Northern Irish, and the reason I mention the Northern Irish thing is not, I don't know, patriotism, but because growing up in Northern Ireland, although actually I was born just north of here in Southampton, I experienced very much firsthand what happens when dialogue breaks down. That was a very extreme situation, of course, but we had a situation where we're breaking down into tribes, where what should be relatively minor distinctions between Catholic and Protestant, or even between nationalist and unionist, exploded, literally and figuratively. Literally and whatever I'm trying to say. And so I was very, very interested when I came to study in England, I studied in London, to get involved in some kind of work there, trying to build bridges. I came to London as a Catholic. And so I got involved at my university at Imperial College, involved in their interfaith group there as the Catholic representative. And I was very passionate about the interfaith stuff, because what we were doing, we would sit down in huge groups, just a big group like yourself. We would discuss issues like morality, we would discuss issues like life after death, sacred scripts and so on. And it was a great way of breaking down stereotypes, of breaking down barriers. And I got very into it and became the Interfaith Officer, which meant I was in charge of the interfaith stuff. And around the same time as becoming the Interfaith Officer, I lost my faith. Which is very embarrassing trying to tell everyone. I was the Interfaith Officer, but I had no faith. So I think I just said, no, an Inter Officer. But despite the fact that I realised, no, I didn't believe in God, but I did believe in good, and as a humanist, I was still just as committed to the principles of interfaith. But interesting how humanists could get involved as well. And I ended up at BHA, heard about what I was doing, and so I started working with them as their dialogue officer. And in this August, I was elected president of the student group, so the National Federation of Atheists, Humanists and Secular Student Societies of the UK and the Republic of Ireland, also known as the AHS. And through my work with the AHS, I'm also very keen to see how students across the UK and Ireland get involved in positive dialogue with religious groups and people. So what is dialogue? There's the Pope, he's waving at Richard Dawkins, the great friend. So dialogue comes in different forms. In the BHA, we use the word dialogue where people would normally use the word interfaith. Obviously, the word interfaith is exclusive to those of us who have no faith. So we say dialogue. Dialogue, very often it's discussion groups, and they can be very similar to debates in that you'll tackle a controversial topic, like morality, for example, like the law, like schools. The difference is, our focus is on creating a discussion. We're not trying to win people over, we're just trying to understand where they come from. That's not to say that debate isn't valuable. Just that there are some times when it's better just to try and understand what the other person's saying, although at least end up screaming at each other. Which is no good. It's also often in the form of common action. So often you might have a church and a mosque will go and help the homeless together, for example. And we do, some humanist groups around the UK have done that as well with local churches, local mosques, and got involved in charity work. It's also often cultural. So especially for religions like Judaism and Hinduism, where there's a strong cultural aspect, people might get involved in sharing cultural things. For example, celebrating Diwali together or Passover. So, what does this have to do with humanists? These are some ideas of my own. There may be others, there may be none. But the first one, we have to share this country. It's very controversial, the number of non-religious people in the UK. Depends on what survey you consult. In the consensus, there are at least 25%, probably more than 50% if you ask a more reasonable question. But the fact remains there's a lot of religious people in the country. And we don't want to, we're pluralists. We don't want to have Muslim streets and Christian streets and humanist streets. We don't want humanist schools. We believe at the BHA in secular education. We should all be taught together. And well, I want my kids, or in the line, to go to school with Muslim friends, Jewish friends, and Christian friends. Then we have to discuss, well, how are we going to get along? How are we going to build this kind of secular pluralist society? It's a bit idealistic, but and a very important point of that has to be sitting down and discussing where we can agree and where we disagree, and in a non-confrontational manner. Also policy areas. The BHA is a member of the Accord Coalition, which is against faith schools, and that includes many religious groups. And the BHA also worked with Quakers and liberal Jews in supporting equal marriage, gay marriage this year. So it can be very conducive to policy. We work together with finding out common goals. But also, importantly, friendships and community bonds. Very often, churches, mosques, synagogues, and humanist groups can be a great way for people to get together and build friendships that aren't actually to do with their religious or non-religious beliefs. And it's a terrible pity that they can't experience that with each other. And it's just a nice thing about the dialogue process is that you can just have those informal friendships, building community bonds. Next. So some criticisms of dialogue. I've been having fun with this presentation, trying to make the happy humanist do different things depending on what I'm talking about. So this is the critical happy humanist, and he's holding his pitchfork and his torch. So criticisms, like a religion is a bad thing. Why would you want to engage with them? And very often people will say that in a sense when you do dialogue, when you sit down with a church group or whatever, you're fraternizing with the enemy. In a sense, that can't be right. Dialogue will not work with everyone. There are some issues where we can't really compromise. For an honest example, female-gender mutilation, there's no compromise in that. So I would have to agree. But it's also important to remember that religion and religious people are a very wide spectrum. Very often misrepresented by their own leaders. And so through doing this work, we get a chance to find, to work with the spectrum and the nicer people within there. But certainly the idea that we could, I'm sure everyone will agree, is that we could somehow draw a line between people, well, there's the atheists here and then the good people, and there's the religion here and the bad people. It is that. And so to say that we should work together. But reinforcing established bodies, some people say, well, if the BHA, for example, starts dialogue with the Catholic Church, their acknowledgement of the Catholic Church is representative of Catholics, which of course isn't true. There are many Catholics who are comfortable with contraception, for example, or with abortion. I would agree with that. And so it's very important that when we do dialogue, when we sit down to discuss issues with religious groups, the focus is on individuals. So people don't have to say, well, I'm here representing all Catholics, I'm here representing all Muslims. It's very much trying to break down those establishments. Lastly, the interfaith or dialogue groups are religious talking shops where people just sit down and say various things and we go home and nothing changes. It really depends on the group. That can be the case. Sometimes it's nice, talking is nice, but while it can be the case, it doesn't need to be. And I'll show some examples where there's some very good practical action come out of these dialogue groups. So our work so far. So I've been volunteering as dialogue officer for about 1.5 years now, and our work has been into a school speakers program with emergency services, remembrance services, and there's a conference coming up. There's probably still that I can't remember today. So school speakers, this is really cool, and it's something that people here can get involved in as well. So, school speakers program, there's a group called the 3FF. The 3FF used to stand for the Three Faiths Forum, and it was designed for Christians, Muslims, and Jews. These days, it includes everyone, but they kept the name 3FF, they just dropped what it actually stands for. It's a logo now. They sent trios of speakers to primary and secondary schools around the UK. And the idea of these trios is that they give you a 2-minute introduction to their religion or belief, and then kids can just ask whatever they want. And the idea is that children can then get a wider appreciation, especially if they're in a religious school, a wider appreciation of different beliefs to their own. Very often, you'll have a Muslim, a Jew, and a Christian going to one of these. And the kids will ask the Jewish person, well, why is it that around Christmas time you have those candles in the triangle? And they'll ask the Muslim, well, why do you face east to pray? They'll ask the Christian something about the Bible. Then the humanists come along, and he'll ask the humanists, why do you believe in morality? What happens when you die? They ask really, really heavy questions. And we find that interfaith groups love having non-religious people here because kids don't feel scared, for whatever reason, to ask humanists these really tough questions, whereas we want to be respectful when they have religious speakers. This is really great, and people have been very good feedback from the religious speakers as well. They find the discussion gets a lot more in depth when you have a non-religious person there. That's when the questions really come out, really good questions. And yeah, they're the humans talking to them. And that's something that's is really expanded at the moment. There are much more school speaker programs going on. I know that some of the groups will be doing school speakers, so maybe
can't hear. Can't hear.
Oh, sorry. Is this a bit better?
Yes.
If I hold it like this? Sorry. Just the last part there. Sorry. I'm very new to this microphone technique. Very rock and roll. Sorry, so the last thing I was just saying is that the humanists tend to shake things up. So people like to ask the difficult questions to the humanists, whereas they're more cautious and respectful to the religious speakers. So it's very positive for everyone to have humanists at these events. We've also been working with the emergency services. There's our firemen humanists. And so most of the emergency services will have equality groups, and they represent the different protected equality groups. For example, sexuality, race, disability, and religion and belief. very often, because people hear religion and believe, they think that means just religion. These are mostly made of religious people on these boards, but they absolutely don't have to be. And there's one particularly involved person who's on the board of his local police and fire brigade and NHS. And what they've been able to do is help advise fire brigade, for example, and the police on how they work with religious groups. So there's a nice example. There was a evangelical Christian group who were giving out hot drinks to people outside nightclubs, at kind of 2 or 3 in the morning. And this is a good thing, because you're helping people with their hangovers the next morning and whatever. And the police were working with them, they're supporting them. However, what they were also doing was giving out literature on Christianity, and some of this was quite homophobic, and they were doing this at gay clubs. And so, what was agreed with this humanist representative was that in future, all groups had to sign up to an equality policy when working with the police, that they would have to obey the police's own rules rather than their particular group's rules. And that was really, really positive. And as I understand, the group is still doing it, but they've stopped literature, which is really great. The fire brigade works very similarly as well. Then within the NHS, there'll be questions relating to, for example, chaplaincy. And there's some, I know perhaps you said, I'm not sure, there's some humanist groups who provide chaplaincy-like services to hospitals. And we can get involved in that as well, in the same way that you can have a Catholic chaplain or a Jewish chaplain. Remembrance services. So the BHA has its For All Who Serve campaign. Humanists are currently not represented at the Cenotaph commemoration on the 11th, remember? And very often around the country as well, services exclude humanists. They include Zoroastrians. Now, there's not a single registered member of the armed forces who is a Zoroastrian. And yet, they are included, but humanists are not. And non-religious members of the armed forces make up something like, I forget the figure, I think it's about 40%, it's quite high. But very often the reason for not including humanists is just ignorance. They think that, well, humanists don't have ceremony, we don't have prayers, so what would we have to say, what would we have to do? And often it's the local interfaith group that is in charge of these remembrance services, or is in charge of the religion and belief aspects. And we've had success in Oxford. The Oxford Humanists used to be excluded, but through getting involved within their local interfaith group, they found the guys who were responsible, in charge of the remembrance service there. And this year, for the first time, they will be included in the service, which is really, really great.
Rory, can I just add, we've been successful here in Bournemouth as well.
Oh, great. Okay, great. That's great to hear. So, we have a conference coming up, a Scottish conference. So there's a Scottish humanist. Not playing the stereotypes at all. So from the 1st to the 3rd of November, there's a conference coming up. It's organised by a Catholic group called the Conforti Institute. They're Americans. And what they're looking to discuss is common ground. And it's a dialogue between Catholics and humanists. Now, it's not between the Catholic Church and the British Humanist Association, but Catholic individuals and humanist individuals. It's very much not. It's not anti-establishment, but at least not pro-establishment. And this conference is very important because it's part of what seems to be a much more welcoming attempt or approach on behalf of the Catholic Church towards atheists, which is a good thing. And at this conference, there'll be speakers. Chris Stedman, who's a humanist chaplain at Harvard University, and Will Storer, who's a lecturer from somewhere. And we're going to have 10 humanists and 10 Catholic attendees. The reason I mention this is because there are still some places left for humanists. You have to get yourself to Scotland. But once you're in Scotland, you have your board and everything. So if you're interested in attending, do let me know. we can talk. This is a very positive development. So good organisations. I only have the one on my board. The reason being that sadly almost all interfaith groups exclude the non-religious. This is slowly changing because it used to be 0. We now have 1. And that would be the 3FF, which used to stand for Three Faiths Forum. It's now just a general dialogue body. However, while most large groups are just for religious people, and often they've got very specific agendas, so they want to discuss Israel and Palestine, for example. There are many local bodies who are inclusive, and this will really vary place to place. Often it just takes a bit of persistence, and they'll let you join. It really depends. But there's about, I think it's about 30 different local groups around the UK who do have humanist representatives on their boards, and even humanist chairs. There's National Interfaith Week, which is a terrible name because interfaith excludes us. However, they are keen to have humanists involved. This is coming up at the end of November, so the 17th to the 23rd. And for the first time we did meet with the coordinators of the Interfaith Week, and they do really want humanists to be involved. So that could be a very nice time if you're interested in having some kind of dialogue event. That was a good week in which to do it, but of course, to make our little point, let's not call it interfaith, let's call it dialogue, or interfaith and belief, or interbelief, something like that. That's coming up. That's sponsored by the government, community and local government department, and they're very keen to have non-religious people involved because it just looks very silly to be missing out such a huge part of the population. So, campus dialogue at universities. This is especially important right now. I don't know how many people may have followed this. What's happening at the LSE at the moment? So it was last week at the Freshers' Fair. The Atheist Society there wore T-shirts with cartoons of Muhammad and Jesus on them, and they were surrounded by security guards and told they would be evicted for harassing other students, which is of course madness. And they had their objects torn down from the stall. It was a bit mad, to say the least. So the exciting world of Twitter has been going wild on these things, and Richard Dawkins is calling it sanctimonious Pricksgate. Which is his typically mild term for security guards. And that's something that the AHS have been trying to help and trying to resolve, and the BHA as well. So they've been provided with a lawyer, and hopefully that will be resolved. But something that really makes stand out is that very often the only time that non-religious students and religious students or these other societies get together is when we're at each other's throats. It's when we're attacking each other. And while, of course, it is crazy to say that you shouldn't be allowed to wear a t-shirt with a cartoon on it, it's also important that we try and encourage good relations at universities. And that's something that, as president of the AHS, I'm very, very keen to promote between students. And so we're getting involved with the 3FF, so that's the group I mentioned before. They're helping us with training, so they do dialogue training, basically how to be nice, but in a very official way. We're also involved with the National Union of Students, the NUS. By and large, what that means is once a year they get all the different leaders of the faith and belief groups, so the Federation of Student Islamic Societies, the Union of Jewish Students, and they take a photo of us, and then we go home. But in that photo, we're together, and we're not angry with each other, and that's what they want. But they're also getting more active and trying to get us to do things together. And something that we will be involved in, for example, is a blood drive. They're trying to get members to donate blood on a particular day as part of National Interfaith. We're also drawing up engagement guidelines. So we are a federation, we're made up of our members, they don't come from us. But tips on how best to go about dealing with other groups on campus, dealing with religious groups, how not to seriously offend each other, where possible. And also crisis management, which is what I was mentioning with this t-shirt, for example. We also had last year, Reading University had a pineapple called Mohammed, and they were kicked out of that. They're still kicked out, they've been dissolved from the university for that. To try and find ways more dialogical, that's a word I discovered, dialogical, more dialogue-related ways of tackling these crises. So of course, the bottom line will always be that free speech is absolute, so our members should have the right to call that a pineapple Mohammed. They should have the right to have an innocent cartoon on their t-shirts. But while that's not negotiable, what we can do is discuss, well, how should we approach this in future? Do we have to be at each other's throats all the time? And that's something that I think this approach to that can really help students around, non-religious students, in avoiding this kind of confrontation in the future. We also have coming up in 2 weeks, or hoping to host at the LSE, which would be perfect, a discussion on shared spaces. So how do we go about sharing a university campus together? And that's not just for atheist students. There are other issues too. For example, there'll be religious societies that have men-only events and women-only events, and how we go about dealing with that. The maddest one, Bristol, last December announced that women couldn't address their events unless married and with their husband present. Yes. And that did not apply to men, of course. So that's something that we also want to discuss, that kind of thing. Okay, so what did you do? So there's our humanist and he's pointing at me. There are SACRE, I guess yourself involved in SACRE, so that's maybe not an issue. SACRE is Standing Advisory Council on Religious Education. And very often these are the people on this body will be the same people on the Interfaith body, and they set the local RA curriculum. Well, I guess you're already super ahead of that. There's a 3FF, who I mentioned through this forum, who are interested in providing training on dialogue. So how do you go about creating spaces where people can be open and honest and discuss issues like, for example, the face veil. What are sensible ways to have that debate, because attention goes throwing things at each other. Emergency services, they have their quality reports. They can be contacted. Often they wouldn't have thought to have a humanist on board. They would be very welcome. They have to, because non-religious people have the same equality rights as religious. There's Interfaith, which is coming up. You can also contact me. I'll have my email address at the end, so you can say hello. And that's just a photo to finish on. That's the Pope kissing someone. Thank you.
Right, is it off? Okay, any questions for Rory? Right, Pat?
I'd just like to know if you think that any of the religions that we know of is actually weakening at the moment.
Certainly in terms of number, there are much fewer Christians in this country than before. Other religious groups, certainly Islam is increasing, there are more Muslims now than before. You could be sneaky and say, what do you mean by weakening? Certainly there are fewer Christians. There's also maybe a resurgence now, people talking about Christianophobia, the idea that Christianity is under attack in the UK, which is not true. Perhaps though also there's a more liberal and welcoming version of Christianity also coming, as is hoped, perhaps with this new Pope, for example. And you might argue that makes the church stronger. But certainly it's a much weaker voice in public life.
Yes, that's what I feel, that if
I'll come with the microphone, otherwise no one will hear you.
I just feel that if you are associating closely with religions that are failing, you are helping them to survive.
I think it's a good point. I think that it depends on how we go about it. And certainly, one thing that we're very keen to focus on is dealing with individuals rather than with their representative groups. So, in dealing with individuals, I don't think, certainly in avoiding dealing with, say, the Church of England as a national body or the Catholic Church as a national body, we're helping to avoid that problem. Ultimately, I think that while you're right that religions by and large are on the decline, they still represent a significant part of the population. And we can't simply wait or hope that that decline will necessarily continue. But that's a fair point, and it needs to be done carefully in the way we go about it. Certainly I wouldn't encourage dialogue with the more extreme elements of those groups, because I think I would like to see this kind of go away, and I hope that's what trends are showing. But there's a great number of religious people who do want this kind of dialogue, who we can work with, who have very similar beliefs to our own, and they are the kind of people we want to have. Perhaps we might encourage the fact that they're religious, but they're doing so in a way that I'm personally very comfortable with. But you're right, we don't want to be with the nutters.
You didn't actually bite the head off that chicken, did you? I just thought it was okay, that's fine. The Interfaith Week, we've tried in a couple of ways to get involved with that. And their publicity material actually lists the encouragement that their people should specifically try to get something going with humanists. But we had no success locally. I spoke to someone at their kind of head office this year, and she was rather sort of dismissive. She suggested that BHA, everybody knew all about this, and it was up to us if we wanted to get involved, which is rather difficult. It's their organisation, it's their event, they're the people who have premises and hold events, and they claim to be encouraging their local people to invite us, but nobody is. Would you agree that that's pretty much the thing?
I think it definitely can be. Certainly, there can be an element of, so someone will say, well, look, why should the Christians be bashing the Muslims? Why should the Muslims be bashing the Hindus? Why should the Hindus be bashing the Sikhs? Let's all bash the atheists. And that can be some of the reason behind some interfaith groups. And that was the case actually with my own group at Imperial. Before I was the atheist interfaith officer, people could say, well, we together are opposing the tide of secularism. We together are opposing this godless world. And in the case of the Interfaith Network, who run the Interfaith Week, I would say that maybe some people involved in that would have that kind of approach. And so, at least officially, they do want to have us involved. And I think increasingly, what I would say is keep on at them, and if if I can help in terms of getting in touch with people who are involved, ultimately it is a legal thing. You can't say this is just for religious people because it's funded by the government. That's not a nice card to play, but it can be played. But absolutely, I think it's something that you need to kind of keep back, because some people they just don't want the atheists to be involved because this is about faith. This is about promoting the idea of faith, which is perhaps more palatable than promoting the idea of one particular religion. And of course, that's to be opposed. So I think that may well be the case here, which is worrying. But we can kind of keep on appling and show them examples of where humanists have been involved. And there are lots of examples, which I can send, getting in touch with humanists who've been involved successfully in their local interfaith groups.
I can't find any.
Okay, good. Well, I can. Yes, no problem. Yeah, definitely, that'd be great. There's a surprising number of humanists who've been just of their own steam, been involved in these kind of weeks and groups. And yes, absolutely getting those stories out there, people saying that, well, okay, when an atheist comes, he or she isn't going to destruct everyone. He or she isn't going to call them, you're all deluded. That makes a big difference. So in my case, I probably would never have been an interfaith officer if I hadn't been as a Catholic. But now I can say, well, I did it. I was an atheist. I didn't mess it up. I didn't insult everything. Yes, I will put you in touch with other people.
Come back to you. Right, a few hands going up. I'll try and get around to you all in turn. Cool.
I fully support your attitude, but I'm rather concerned about the fact that the repercussions on, say, for example, Catholics would be counter-effective in as much as I can imagine a poor Catholic going to church on Sunday and some fire and brimstone priest standing up there saying, we've got members who've been talking with atheists, and the poor fellow's going to get a dog's life. You know, do you think that's worthwhile?
I think that's a fair point. And I know it has been the case that people have been demonised coming from the Catholic Church and trying to engage in the dialogue. It's in the current context, from what Pope Francis has been saying about atheists, that we can go to heaven, which is nothing. And you will, actually, he said, if you follow him on Twitter, you'll spend less time in purgatory. So I'd like to reassure you all that coming to this talk, you will not spend no time in purgatory. Currently, I think it'll be a lot easier for Catholics to be involved. But that's a fair point. And many people do risk being, not necessarily ostracized, but at least criticized from within their groups for doing this kind of work. And indeed from within, humanists may well face criticism for being involved in this kind of work, for fraternizing the enemy.
It could be counterproductive, couldn't it? It could strengthen it. It could be counterproductive in as much as it would strengthen the church's hold on their community, wouldn't it?
I think potentially, which is a rubbish answer to give, but it could, and that's something that I guess is up to the individuals involved. So someone who feels that they're going against his or her church, they'll have to decide for themselves whether it's worth it, or maybe they think that the church is ceasing to represent them. I think by and large, that hasn't been the case. We've had very positive feedback from the religious leaders as well about the involvement of their flock. But I guess it's up to the individual. That could well happen. And it's for them to decide if that's a step they want to take to go against maybe the priest or the rabbi or whatever it is.
I was very interested in the tweet-based style that we discussed. I'm just wondering how it worked. Because I was wondering whether it was just an initial introduction, because most schools they do that.
Just put it towards you.
Sorry. I was saying I was interested in how the three faiths dialogue actually worked, because schools teach three faiths, and I'm wondering what the difference would be there. Say they study Judaism and Christianity and Muslims, and you had a Christian, a Muslim, and a humanist. The first introduction to humanism, they would know about the others. I just wondered how you worked that out, and whether it was an introduction to humanism or not.
So with these school speaker programs, when the speakers go in, the 3FF will have been there before to give a workshop, kind of a basic guide to Christianity or humanism, so they will have had a little bit through that. Certainly when it's a religious school, for example, like a Catholic school likes this trio, they will have much more understanding, obviously, of it is Christian speaker and have a lot more understanding of their perspective than the others. So that can be the case. And which I think is perhaps partly why humanists get these these kind of fundamental questions chucked at them. Because the kids have had these burning away, but the teacher is Catholic and teaching a Catholic syllabus, and their friends seem to be Catholic, so no one asks them. So that can be the case, that you're the first person to stand up and say, I'm non-religious, I don't believe in God, and that's okay. So yeah, that is actually sometimes the case. It depends on the school and the catchment area. It can also happen the other way. The school has a lot of Muslim students and they have never met a Jew before. And so that's the first Jewish person to say, well, that's what we do. Which is one of the big benefits of it. The fact that they're finally some exposure to these different beliefs.
I was just wondering if it might be better to have an introduction to all three and then get thinking and debate. I think it might have been a more balanced discussion. We're just interested in how it worked.
I agree, that would be a lot better. I think it's sadly, from what I understand at least, the nature of religious education, certainly in day schools, is often very biased, and that's not possible. Certainly myself, I went to a Catholic school and I only learned Catholicism than anything else, except for the Muslims.
That will now be against them.
So sadly not in Northern Ireland, unfortunately. Yeah, well, we're special. We're special. We get away with all kinds of things. So yeah, I think that's a very good point, and that would be much better. I know teachers are prepped to try and give some kind of training beforehand, and normally the kind of school that would want to invite speakers is the kind of school that would already have done something. But sadly, yeah, that's our area, unfortunately.
Yeah, Rory, I'm coming from the opposite end of the spectrum to you, most people, I'd imagine. I went to a college about 40 years ago, and I was the only Christian on my course. Everybody else was a pub-going, rugby-playing type, and I was persecuted. I was physically and verbally abused on a regular basis. The only person I got on with was a Muslim, and we had a fantastic relationship. We made a film together. What is so wrong with being a Christian, a Muslim, or a Jew that a humanist has to, oppose them? Can you answer that?
Good question.
It's wrong.
You've got some answers already.
Yeah, I think it's something that everything will have an opinion on. Certainly, what I'm interested in this kind of work would be trying to work against that, to try and build understanding through dialogue.
Things probably have changed in Portuguese.
Yes. So, I guess, personally, I don't see it as my job to try and belittle or, and I think increasingly people are trying to, part of why we have, say, Richard Dawkins being more strident atheists is a reaction to what was a very, very religious atmosphere. The idea that being atheist is a terrible thing. And perhaps now that a lot of ground has been gained, people are starting to look at how people do approach religion and certainly it's terrible what happened to you. That's something that I hope this dialogue work gives.
As somebody said over there, it does strengthen you, and it makes you more determined. And I think that's why so many Christian groups are dwindling, because they haven't had enough persecution. Go for it.
Humanists aren't against Christians. You've got it all wrong.
Yeah, I think so. I'd say humanists maybe are against Christianity, but hopefully not against the people themselves. But anyway, I'm not representing humanism like in any proper way, and there's loads of humanists here who will have their own opinions.
Well, dear friends, I'm personally, I will be honest, appalled, simply appalled by the discord of Christianity, particularly in this town. I'm going around and I'm seeing awful lots of arguments, and I think it's about time the whole church came to an understanding of this. Are we created by God, or are we not? Well, I'm not an atheist, and I love the Lord God, and I know that the Lord God loves us, and I know that we've been created, and also, as a little standby part, if you look at a flower, and the flowers and the greenery, the whole lot has been created by God, and the colours, the smell of flowers, and that is not atheism, surely. So if we believe in the Lord God, we should stick to it, but not have discord in the fellowships of the Christian people.
Is this a joke? Do you want to reply to that?
Thank you. Well, certainly, I guess it's that would be more a matter for Christians. I think where the discord is violent, like in Northern Ireland, then anyone, whether Christian or not, can agree that it's a good thing to work against that. Whereas doctrinal, then I guess it's more for the churches, and I'm not a member of the church. In terms of the flower, I guess for me the beauty of the flower is enough, and I'm happy for the beauty to stop at the beauty and not come from anywhere. But that's, many people do see God in nature. I'm quite happy to enjoy a sunset and fall asleep and not worry about where it came from. But that's maybe God.
Sorry, it's one of two things, and I'm not quite sure where to go first. But I'll pick up the flower first, because there is another side to that story. It is a lovely idea that you look at the flower and it's beautiful and you think God created that for us to enjoy. You then have to look at other things, and I think it's one that Attenborough talked about at one point. Also the creation of a little worm who gets into a little boy's eye and sends him blind. And is that also part of God's creation? Okay, that's for people to sort out who believe in God. Here as humanists, I don't think it's our business to be listing the things we think are wrong with people who believe in religions. That's for them. What I do think is paramount, and I think you're talking about it, although you haven't perhaps put it in those very words, it's that in our dialogue we're looking for what is common to us all as human beings. It's the very reason we're called humanists, but we're not the only ones who are concerned about that. And sometimes I think through a day in my life in religious faith, which somehow, in a way, is there for Sundays and Fridays or Saturdays, and whichever your particular religious day is, and it may be the basis of your life, but actually for most people it's not what they are using day by day. That can be stuff which doesn't divide us, but actually unites us in caring about ourselves, our families, people in Africa who don't have enough to eat, all of those things that we care about unite us as human beings and don't need to divide us in our core beliefs.
Here. I think that's exactly right. And it's appealing to that sense of common humanity, shared humanity. And through that, we're hopefully encouraging people not to focus so much on those kind of differences. I completely agree. Or you should have given the talk.
I was, as a child, with parents and grandparents who were very anti-religious, and the reason for that was that the females thought they had a terrible problem. They could never become senior members. And then, because it was after the Second World War, according to God, 70 million largely innocent people had died in a matter of about 7 years. So, as a child, being brought up innocent to religion, maybe I wonder if that happened to you. Because I think most people grow up into religion because their parents have already influenced them when they're very young. 1 and 2.
Certainly. The fact that I was Catholic is a great coincidence given that my parents were both also Catholics. So, yes, that's what it led to. I was brought up that way. People do change, of course. I did. But I think that's right. A lot more just stick with what we were brought up with. It's comforting.
I was just thinking when you said that, Rory, it'd be interesting if people who were Catholics, having children, that all of us, spontaneously, they didn't know what religion their child was going to be. They could have a Muslim child or a Zoroastrian child, just spontaneously. That would be interesting.
Thank you very much, Rory. I lived in Northern Ireland for 30 years, so I wasn't born there or brought up Catholic, but I did. My daughter was nearly 3 when I went there, and my son was born in Northern Ireland. And so, I can relate to what you're saying so much about Northern Ireland. I found it, I'm really just telling you a bit of my story, but, I was so appalled at the age of 4 when you had to decide which school they went to. And I just couldn't believe it. I don't know where I'd been, but I didn't think this sort of thing happened. And so when the integrated school was formed in the Northwest, I sent we sent our children there. And that was a lot better, but of course there were not enough integrated schools in Northern Ireland. But it was very difficult for me, being a non-believer. Actually, Northern Ireland made me much surer about being a non-believer, because I could see what religion was doing there. And it was very, very difficult being an atheist in Northern Ireland.
Yes, and I think the issue of faith schools in Northern Ireland is extremely important. It's like a 2-word argument against religious schools in Northern Ireland. That's all you have to say. And certainly, I've got a friend who her parents are Chinese, they're Buddhists. They came to Belfast and they had her there. And like you were saying, just age 4, they had to decide, our Buddhist daughter, is she a Catholic Buddhist or is she a Protestant? and it does sound funny, but that's genuinely, they had to decide that and they decided, because of the Christian school, she'd be a Protestant. And so she went to a Protestant school, and she is not Protestant. She's not religious, but she had that Protestant upbringing, and it's mad, and it's terrible.
I don't
But my daughter had to go to the Protestant school, first of all, before the integrated school was formed. And one day, a friend of hers said to her, "Are you green or orange?" And she really didn't know. She said, "I'm pink." That's really, really true.
I'd just like to clarify a point from our friends up there. I'm a humanist. I was brought up in the Church of England. I'm a humanist now, and I'm an atheist. But you seem to have the opinion that because we're atheists or humanists, we've got some evil, spiteful feeling toward you because you believe in a God that we don't believe in. Don't you realise that humanists are quite happy for you to believe in Jesus, and a Muslim to believe in Muhammad, and a Buddhist to believe in Allah or a Buddha, and we're free-thinking people. You seem to have this attitude that we want to attack you. We don't want to attack you. We just want you to understand that you have the freedom of choice to choose, and if you look at it like we look at it scientifically, we can't accept that there is a God. But that doesn't make it right or wrong. But we don't feel you're right or wrong. We feel you believe in something which we don't. That's like the Conservatives not believing what the Labour Party believe. You're not hated enemies. You seem to get the wrong opinion of what a humanist is. A humanist wants you to have a happy life, benefit, and believe in what you wish. But we point out what we think. That's all.
Okay, cool. I'm going to if you won't mind for a minute, Rory, I'm going to give right to reply to that. Richard, you want to say something?
No, I mean, the point's well taken. I was talking about a very specific time in my life. I was brought up with secular parents. They didn't go to church. They never encouraged me to go to Sunday school or church or anything. But I did, because I was rebelling. On the point of secularism, I've just been reading with great difficulty Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion. I'm sure you've all read it. It's kind of the humanist Bible, isn't it? I get a lot of feeling there of aggression and antipathy. Maybe it's just the way I read it, but he apart from trying to blind me with science, he does come across as somebody who really has an issue against religious people. So that's why.
One man, sir. He's one man.
I know. But he's the focus of so much of the current debate in this country on secularism. And it does come across a bit like that. But I'm sure that you and all the other dear people here are totally different.
We could say a lot about Richard. I'm not surprised you have that view just reading it at the moment. But anyway, Richard, did you want to make a point?
Yes, I'd like to agree wholeheartedly with what Paul said, but I can't quite. I don't have anything against individual Christians. I do have something against, or any other religion, come to that, but I do have issues with some religious practices which I think are dangerous and bad for mankind. I certainly can't sit down with a group of religious people and do this trying to understand each other bit. I never will. So it's better, I think, to move on and say, well, we won't get anywhere with that. But going back to what Angela said, what it's all about is, and what you said, the very first line on your presentation, I think, was getting along together. How the hell can we make things a little bit better and find the common things? But I can't, in an unqualified way, say that I'm not against religion, because in some aspects I am. Everyone in this room will know things that go on in religious practice that they absolutely abhor.
I think that's fair. I would be cautious of saying, atheist and religious in a kind of binary sense. You're right, there will be definitely aspects of religion and certain religious people and certain religious groups with which we have very little in common. the key thing is to find those with whom we do, and there's not a lot of them. But you're right, I mean, I wouldn't expect us to have dialogue. To use the example I gave before, with, say, a Somali Muslim group that practice female genital mutilation. There's an obvious example where that's just not close up, not permissible. So I would agree, but it's more a question of extent. There's a lot of guys there with whom we can. But you're right, absolutely. And it's not, you shouldn't be checking in your opinions at the door. You kind of come in and everyone's automatically agnostic. You do have your beliefs, and it's right that you discuss them, and it's good to be open about them. And there will be many areas where you have nothing in common and you have to call it a day. But the hope and the experience so far has been that there's enough that it's worthwhile. But I think that's fair. We're not going to all agree. Definitely not.
Any other questions from yes?
I'm just interested to hear some ideas from you about how we can develop more of our local dialogue with groups. You mentioned the 3FF and the contacting local emergency services. Could you talk a little bit more about what the emergency services, sort of what bodies they've got that we could get involved in, and how often they meet, and what the commitment would be? Because I think one of the problems we often have locally is where we want to be doing these things and getting involved in sackers and things, but of course, someone's got to do it, and it's got to, find people to take on the responsibility. So I'd like to get a better picture, really, of sort of what the involvement could be to be effective.
So there will be an email going out sometime soon on the BHA newsletter about getting involved in emergency services, because it has been, I think, a bit overlooked. And that will give a lot better detail. Certainly, I was chatting with someone a couple of weeks ago who's been very, very active in this. And he was saying that the meetings are about twice a year. So it's not very, very often. Although in his case, he actually ended up developing a good personal relationship with the chief of police, or whatever the higher police in the area was. And they would meet more informally more often. But I think the commitment is something like twice a year. I know that they all have to have these bodies. In terms of contacting them, there's BHA have a big list of the different ones to contact. And I can definitely pass it on. And that's something that will hopefully be, I think, in the next couple of weeks, be encouraged around all the local groups that they get involved with these bodies. It's something like twice a year. That would. But yeah, I can try and find that information before we send it out and send it in advance.
And then, sorry. And then from them, so they have their sort of meetings twice a year, but then what goes from there? Is it in sort of supporting people in emergency services when they want to have representatives from no faith as well as faith, who are then volunteers to provide support? I mean, apart from these 2 meetings a year, what else is going on that the emergency services are sort of interfaithing in some way? Sort of thing?
I think it's anything that for example, the police are doing that is related to faith and belief. They get advice on it from these groups. So, for example, this particular man I was talking to, they had 2 officers who were assigned to general equality. So, for example, they would go and meet disability groups, they would go and meet LGBT groups, and they would go to visit, say, local mosques, and they would chat to the imam about how do Muslims perceive the place. They go to the church, and so just finding a anonymous voice on those kind of things. But anything that involves religion, belief, and faith, with the fire services within NHS. So it has the potential to be actually very, very, very useful. I guess it depends on the area and what they're up to and what the problems are. But certainly the particular example from Ms. Fallon, it was seen very, very positive, especially having a humanist there. Someone, for example, who was able to advise on this homophobic literature. Really, really powerful, I think. But yeah, we should have it going out very soon. My boss, Sarah, who's head of education, is currently on jury duty. So that's why it was kind of calmed all of a sudden. But it should be next few weeks. But I can send you stuff anyway myself.
You want to be some firefighters, don't you? Sorry, don't just say 999. Any more questions for Rory? We've been keeping Rory going for a good half hour on questions. But any more? Yes, Richard?
Just a couple of observations about things that we've been doing here and the responses we get. There's a local interfaith group known as Faith Link, and they steadfastly just ignore us. We tried to correspond with them, tried to put a reasonable case. I can't even get a response. When we were working out our campaign for recognition in the local Remembrance service, among the people I contacted were the Equality and Diversity Officer for Bournemouth Council, who acknowledged my communication, said he'd get back to me, but never did. I thought he might have been an ally, in fact. But the person who responded for us was the Anglican clergyman who runs the service, and who happens to be very much for inclusion. Without his help, we wouldn't have got in. That's right, isn't it? You know that. And so you never quite know how people are going to react. There's a local chaplaincy which has a very enlightened chairman, and he's welcomed humanists in. A couple of us went through their training, and one of our members is in fact on their list. But he's having a hell of a struggle with his fellow Christians. It's very much a Christian-based thing, but he's trying to turn it into an inclusive thing, and he's having dreadful problems. His friends, religious friends, just don't like it. You never quite know which way people are going to jump. When I first walked into the Dorset Sacre meeting and said, hello, I'm a humanist and I want to join, they were horrified. They didn't know what to do with me. Oh my God, what does our constitution say? And so on and so forth. And I had a discussion with the then chairman. This was probably 5-6 years ago. And he said, well, Richard, I just don't quite know what to do, because if I let you in, we'll have to let all the other weirdos in. He said that. So, you never know what reaction you're going to get. We find. I imagine they find the same.
Yes, it does depend a lot on individuals, and how open they are to weirdos like us. It's often a very slow process. For example, with 3FF, it was about 5 years ago that they decided they were letting humanists to be involved in this 3 Faiths forum. It's only now that we're actually discussing maybe we should stop being called 3 Faiths forum. Even though they're under 3, they're under faiths, and they're not even really a forum. But it takes a lot of time. What seems to be the case is that it's getting better, and people are more aware that other people can be involved. But I know, it's a sacred. A lot of sacred just say full stop. No, they wouldn't let numbers of people be involved, which is. Are you on sacred now?
I'm not something else to do it, but we have members on each of the 3 local sacreds.
Okay, over. And in terms of the Faith Link, are they council funded or are they their own thing?
No, they're not. Well, no, I don't think so.
Okay. I think if it's council funded, it's a lot more straightforward because they can't receive that money if they're discriminating.
I will check. Yeah.
Otherwise, which I will do, if I send you examples and we need contact details of humanists who have been involved, so you can show to them, well, when it's there, we're not necessarily going to be saying it's all diluted. There's actually something positive to contribute that might help. Hopefully, but sadly, right, if it's all an individual, if you've got one person who's in charge and says no, then it's really tough.
Okay, any Further questions? Okay, well, I'd like to just say thank you again, Rory, for a very interesting afternoon. We'll certainly take some of these discussions forward in committee. New volunteers for the committee, so we'll be discussing that. If any of you here today would like to get involved in this, feel inspired by what you've heard this afternoon, then please do let us know, because there are lots of things that we can get involved in. Lynn particularly has been trying to get Dorset Humanist members to go to various forums that we get invited to. There's plenty of scope for us to do that, so do come and see Lynn as well. I'd just like to say thank you to Christians who've come here today. I hope it hasn't made you feel too uncomfortable, and please do come to my Alpha talk next month.
What time is it?
It's 7:30 at the Greenhouse Hotel. So that will be my personal response to Christian faith. Finally, just to say another thank you, Rory, to you, and will you all please show your appreciation for Okay, don't forget our library. Pop something in the bowl by the door if you can. Do